of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Environment, Speaker of the Parliament, ambassadors, dear guests. It's a pleasure being here today at this very interesting conference that is starting today. I will in my talk today start by describing the interesting transition that has taken place in Iceland, removing from being extremely dependent on fossil fuels as many other countries to depending heavily on renewable energy. And I will also elaborate on why this happened, what was the drive, and very importantly, what has the economical impact of that been on Iceland. I will then move on and discuss climate issues, how renewable energy and especially geothermal can and has to play an important role in the agreement that was signed 2 weeks ago or last week in New York. And finally, I will discuss some of the major challenges that I see in further harnessing geothermal, both here in Iceland and in other countries. In generally, we can say that Iceland is a small country, especially if we look at the number of inhabitants. And we are a country that is blessed with very valuable natural resources. That is our fortune. The three most important ones are the fisheries that we are very well known for, our fantastic nature, and very valuable renewable energy sources. The two of them are very well known, the hydro, which we have depended on heavily for producing electricity, geothermal, which has been the backbone of the energy system, and finally we have found out that the wind that is always blowing here is also a valuable resource. We therefore proudly claim that Iceland is the land of renewable energy, and we are very proud of that. And our clean energy is strongly linked to the identity and the image of the country. If we look at the primary energy use in Iceland, going far back, we see that in the 1930s we were quite dependent on coal, as many other countries. We then started to use geothermal more, but went on really to change to oil, as many countries did also. But it is around 50 years ago, then we started a very interesting transition where we moved more and more from oil, and this is especially space heating that we are looking at there, having this big impact, and moved on changed into geothermal energy. So today we are, as I can say, that 85% of our primary energy use is renewable energy, hydro and geothermal. Geothermal being by far the biggest one. And this is maybe one of the reasons why we claim that we are land of renewable energy. We can also say that we produce a lot of energy, especially on the electricity side, where there is no country in the world that is producing as much energy per capita. We often like to measure per capita. We always win then. But this tells us that we are producing also a lot of energy. So we produce a lot of energy, and 85% of the energy is renewable. So this is the reason why we claim that we are the land of renewable energy. But it's interesting to remember that this transition was controversial. It was not an easy decision to make, although we all want to say that we agreed to do this. But this was a challenging decision. When the decisions were made in the 1970s, this was not obvious that this was possible. Then fossil fuels, oil was in many ways less expensive. The risk was less, and as with any renewable projects, there were high upfront costs and risk. But still, the people at that time, the entrepreneurs at that time, they decided to move ahead. And we even had elections here in Reykjavik where the main topics were, should we support geothermal or should we continue with the oil? And we were happy that the people that supported geothermal was the one that won that race. But it was an ongoing work of a lot of people that really believed the concept, took on many difficult decisions, and they finished their jobs. we can say that the geothermal energy history in Iceland has a long history. We have been using this source almost since we settled in Iceland. And this has always been a threat in Iceland, but this has always created opportunities. Opportunities to mine sulfur, for bathing and for washing. And we started, as I said earlier, in the 1930s to use this also for space heating, and then for power generation in 1960. But then we have seen all kinds of use that I will go further in later, like as for greenhouses, for snow melting, and etc. But what was the drive that we went on to do this? Because at that time when this started, people were not so worried about the climate changes. It was not environmental aspects that was the main driver there. It was really, what I believe was the main driver was that it was economical drive. We needed this to support our economy. It was too expensive especially to heat up our houses. And this picture here from the Icelandic Energy Authority shows how much space heating has saved compared to doing it with oil. We can always discuss, is this the right comparison to compare to oil? But I think it's fair because we moved from oil to geothermal. Of course, we could then have moved from oil to electricity, but this gives you an indication of the savings that took place. And this is more than $10 billion that we have saved as a country, and this is in foreign currency, by making the decision. And this is, of course, dependent on the oil price every year, which has been quite fluctuating. But annually, per capita, we are saving $1,600 per annum, per capita. So it's about $6,500 per family with four that we are saving. And so the main driver for this, the main reason why we could do it, of course, we had this fantastic resource that we were blessed with, that the volcanoes around us give us. But the driver was very strong economical drive and the lack of foreign currency, that we were really having troubles just paying for this. So this development took place, we can say, fully without state subsidies, which is a very interesting that this was possible, because we see how other countries that have been moving in this direction have had to depend heavily on subsidizing renewable energy sources. But this has really helped Iceland and had a major influence in developing from an Arctic country into a very modern society that you see today. And I think we can say that this is probably one of the single most influencing factor that has had this impact on modernizing the country. Although we take this as something that is just for granted today, this has had a very important effect on this. But it has not only the economical part, it has also had a very big impact on the quality of life in Iceland. That we are able to build big houses, we are able to keep high temperatures, as you feel in this big hall today, which is really a benefit because of the weather here in Iceland. We have of course, the street lighting, we have the swimming pools, we are producing vegetables in our greenhouses. We have been able to attract industries to use the energy that we are producing, and etc., etc. And it's really a question that we should ask, and I often ask, how many would live in Iceland if there was no geothermal energy? I think that's a question that we should ask, and I think we would be quite less. And this is because of the weather. It is the long winters, and then we could go on and ask if we were independent. I think that would also be a big question, if we would have the financial strength to become independent without this fantastic resource. But we can do much better, and there's a long way to go. And we have to continue to, as we have done in the past, to further develop the geothermal energy and use it in and use it better and get more value out of it for the nation. There's a lot of possibilities in food production. We can use get more revenue streams out of the geothermal energy, not only the heat and the electricity. We see many very good examples about that, and you will hear about that in the conference. The resource park in Reykjanes being the example we all look to. Further development of biotech and also very interesting further integration with tourism, because we see many of our biggest tourist attractions are really power plants or something that is linked to the power plant. The best example being the Blue Lagoon and also the power stations close to Reykjavik are very popular places for tourists to visit, and they really admire what we have been doing in this area. So the question, can Iceland be 100% renewable? And the answer there is, of course, yes. We are already 85%, so it is possible. We have already made remarkable results in the space heating and electricity production. But the last 15% will be quite tricky, because this means that we need a complete transition in transportation. We see very interesting things happening with cars, where there is no doubt that will accelerate. And the big difference with cars that has taken place is 10 years ago, these were really startup companies that were producing electricity cars. There was really producers that you never heard of, that they only produced electricity cars. And these were weak financially companies, and they could not have put a lot of money into development. But now we see that all the major car producers are putting a lot of emphasis on electricity cars and a lot of money into it, and we see the cars improving every year. So there's no doubt that the car transition is happening. But then we have the shipping fleet and the airplanes, which are tricky. So there's a need for strong technology development. But this is exactly the same situation that the entrepreneurs in the 1950s and 60s had when they started. It was not obvious that it would be, how they would do it or if it would be possible, but they just did it. But it is another thing that it will make it a little bit more tricky now is that for Iceland to move ahead is that it's not as economical driven. The benefits that we see out of it, getting out of it, is not as obvious as we did with the space heating. So I think the climate issues have to have bigger impact on how we behave and how we make decisions in the future. So just a short note, word on the climate issues and the agreement that was done in Paris and now signed in New York. That this is a very ambitious goal to reduce the effect of climate, and this is, as the previous speaker said, and this really says that we have to move from fossil fuels to renewable energy or some other clean energy. Of course, there is another side also that we have to reduce as much as we can how much energy we use, and the impact we have on the environment. But this is maybe a bigger task than many people believe, because although dangerous to the atmosphere, fossil fuels possess many good characteristics, especially when the prices go down. What was really driving the development in recent years was very high prices of fossil fuels. But the price has gone down, so they're more competitive. But they also fossil fuels are easy to transport. You can create a lot of energy in compact facilities. You can select the location. You can place the power plant close to a big city, and they are rather flexible in use. They can produce. You can control when they produce. So they have many benefits, although they are very negative on the climate. So renewables energy, although at the same time has very limited effect on the climate, but is in many ways challenging. First of all, it's difficult to transport, not the same as with oil and coal. We have to build them in many small steps in often remote areas. And also the location is often sensitive, in a sensitive area. Hydro plant is where there is a waterfall. Geothermal plant is where there is a high temperature area, and etc. And so these renewable energy plants, they have often quite a big environmental impact, even though they have very limited impact on the climate. So if we are going to accept, this change, or we're going to stand by this decision, we will have to accept significant environmental impact from the renewable energy sources. Doesn't matter if it's wind, solar, if it is hydro or geothermal. And then we also have to accept that we have to connect these systems together, because we cannot select the location. So this challenge, although it looks very easy on paper to move from the bad fossil fuels to the nice renewables, this is in fact only measured on the climate part. The other issues, you often have more environmental impact from the renewable than you have from the fossils, and also because in a fossil fuel you can select where you have the plant. But this is something we need to discuss, and we need to find out ways to limit this effect. But this complex and this ambitious target really requires completely rethinking of how the energy sector integrates with the public society. And it's very important that we admit that this is a complex and controversial change. For example, typically a fossil fuel plant is about 1,000 megawatt, and here I'm talking about electricity production. Of course, geothermal, as I said earlier, is also very well suited for space heating. A typical 1,000 megawatt coal plant, in Kenya, we would need 5, typical geothermal plants. In Iceland, 10 to build one, and in Germany, about 200. So this is, and then connect them together. This does not mean that we should not do it. We need to take all kinds of small steps to solve it, because this competition with this developed way of producing energy with fossil fuels is a very strong competitor if you only measure it on economical terms. The geothermal is often built in populated areas or close to populated areas, as in Iceland, and we have learned that we have to be very careful how we work there, because of the environmental impact from the plants, and we have to minimize them in all ways we can. We have to minimize the pollution through brine and gases. We have to be careful not to create earthquake when we are pumping down the steam we have been using. We have to minimize the impact on sensitive areas, and we have to show regard and respect to the local community, that we have to be humble when we come into these areas, and we have to get acceptance and agreement from the local community when we come into their areas. With future development of technology, there are huge opportunities, as always, with this fantastic resource. We have a long way to go in optimizing the efficiency. We are exploring to drill into hotter areas and deeper, and I was very pleased to see that our colleagues here in Iceland just signed agreement to drill the second deep drilling hole. We at Landsvirkjun drilled the other one about 5 years ago. A very successful project, very challenging, but I hope we will get a step further and possibly all the way now with the effort that HS Orca is doing now. We have the possibilities of utilizing low temperature geothermal fields in much better areas, especially for space heating, and etc., etc. But key thing is we have to increase innovation. We have to be creative to get more out of the plants we are doing with less environmental impact, and we have to make sure that we are doing this in a sustainable way. A very interesting factor with geothermal energy, which is both a challenge and also an opportunity, is that it can be a sustainable driver. It really can support the 3 pillars of sustainable development: the social part, the economical part, and the environmental part. as the plant not only can be producing energy and heat, it can also create jobs. It can work with other industries like tourism. It can create, bring in fresh water to areas where there was no access to fresh water. It can facilitate industrial development. It can reduce the carbon footprint in the area, and it can create tax revenues. So it's really a strong driver for sustainability, supporting all the three important pillars of sustainable development. Not many energy or energy resources offer these possibilities, if any. So finally, I would say that geothermal energy and geothermal energy companies have to be good neighbors, and they need to operate in a very responsible way. Thank you.